Welcome to On the Couch Conversations with the Warehouse. We are a non-profit organization based in Cape Town, South Africa, passionate about societal transformation through an engaged and justice-centered church. We believe that Jesus is never disengaged from pain, oppression, or injustice, and as such, neither should we be. Join us on a journey to explore what it means to emulate his ways of being within our context today.
Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Happy Tuesday evening. I hope that you're all well. It's really wonderful to see many faces that we know and some that I don't. You are all very, very welcome, and we are really happy to have you with us as we journey on this conversation exploring praxis-informed worship. And we will go a little bit deeper into what we are talking about when we say that this conversation really will be unpacking some of that. Sorry, this thing is distracting me a little. So welcome to this event. I'm super excited to be part of this conversation this evening with three people who I deeply love and have a lot of respect for. And I think they are really wonderful conversation partners as we explore this particular topic together. I have seen the ways that they are working this stuff out in their lives and the journeys that they're on and the commitments that they have made in their lives and in their exploration in this. And so I think this is going to be a really wonderful conversation. I think they wouldn't want me to say this, but I think we all can learn so much from them. And I hope this is a space for us to learn together from them, but from each other as we create this space together. So thank you for being here. I'll just briefly say who the panelists are. So we have Charlie on my left. I don't know where he is on your screen. We have Thami and we have Mégan, all absolutely incredible people. And they will introduce themselves and speak a little bit more about what they're doing and who they are in a bit. But I first just wanted to briefly give a bit of framing for the conversation this evening. The title for this event was Praxis-Informed Worship. And this idea of praxis, which I'll explain a little bit and we'll go into more in this conversation, but it is, and I think has become a very central thing to the work that we do as the Warehouse, and I think a deep commitment that we hold to. And really it's this idea of action, informing and forming reflection, which is forming and informing action. And I think a good way to kind of understand it is really in terms of what it is critiquing or responding to. So there's often in our society, there's spaces where there's a lot of deep kind of theoretical engagement and reflection, and often there's not much action happening from these spaces, and these spaces feel very disengaged from the things that are actually happening on the ground. And then you have the opposite of that, which feels like there's a lot of action, a lot of things happening, but without a lot of deep kind of reflection about that action. So this idea of praxis is saying, actually, we need both of these things, and we can't have one without the other. And so praxis is really this commitment to taking action, but action which is formed by our reflection, and our action then shapes our reflection, which shapes our action. So today we are thinking about how this plays out or needs to play out within the space of worship. Broad worship in terms of the broad sense, but also sung worship and what we often see as worship in our churches. So given that, so there's this praxis cycle, which kind of helps us to go on this journey of action and reflection. And Holland and Henriot, these people kind of developed this cycle, which they called the pastoral cycle, embodying this idea of praxis. And it basically has these four, they call them 4 moments, which are kind of spiral. They influence each other. It's not a linear process, but I think it's kind of a helpful framework to engage with. So the first one is they call insertion or immersion. And that's really kind of locating ourselves in our particular context that we are in or working in or seeking to engage, and really kind of becoming familiar with our context. Then the next phase is social analysis. So this allows us to see this context and see our immersion within the broader context, whether it's the social context, the historical context, the political context, and to kind of critically engage with how these different things have influenced the context. Then the next one is theological reflection, or we can look at it as prophetic imagination. And this is engaging with how our faith, how theology speaks to our context and speaks to our social analysis. And then the last one is action, because really this idea of praxis kind of must result in some kind of action. And so from this deep immersion, the social analysis, the theological reflection, we act as a result of all of this. So we'll kind of be following this, this process in our conversation today. And yeah, just to kind of unpack this thing a little bit more. So initially, before I hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more, we wanted to locate ourselves more broadly as we're entering into this conversation. And so I just want to invite everyone here, if you are able, to answer these 2 questions, or you can answer one or both in the chat, and we'll give a few minutes for you to do that. So firstly, what are the spaces that you are or have been engaged in, which have shaped how you understand and practice worship? And then what is your particular interest in this conversation? So take a couple minutes and answer those, because I think we want to create space in this conversation for everyone who is part of it. And so we locate ourselves together. We locate ourselves within our own immersions, whatever those look like. So take the next couple of minutes to write some reflections in the chat, and then we will get started with this conversation. Cool, I'm seeing a couple of messages in the chat. From Leanne, interested to learn more about how worship intersects with justice and what that could look like. Thank you. From Tando, family has shaped worship, an interest in reimagining worship. Cool. From Carol, South Africa, Justice Conference 2018 changed and shaped my practice. My interest is how justice and worship intersect and why we don't have justice and worship tied together. Thanks, Carol. Craig here, I've been shaped by charismatic and evangelical spaces of worship, and more recently as part of the Warehouse community. I'm interested in how these 2 spaces can intersect in ways that lead to worship that is rooted in the truth of the place where we live and its history and context, alongside being energized and enabled by the Spirit and what she is doing among us. Thank you. Cool. Okay, well, I won't read them all, but feel free to keep posting those as we go. But I would like to invite my friends to introduce themselves. So please, let's go to Charlie first, and then Thami, and then Mégan. And maybe you can just briefly introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about who you are, and give us an idea of your particular point of insertion or immersion as it relates to this conversation. Some of the spaces that you have been or are being shaped in this space. Charlie?
I'm Charlie, here in Cape Town, and yeah, I was just reading Hilary's comment because she put some names in there, I don't know why. But Lauren and myself, we at St. Peter's, or been at St. Peter's for some time. Before that, in a few different spaces in terms of church. But so particularly similar to Carol, had a really cool awakening in 2018 with the Justice Conference. And at the same time, I was in my first year at St. John's Leadership Academy. And so, boom, like there's this almost injection of like what's going on here when it comes to sung worship in particular. And then the process of the St. John's Leadership Academy takes you through the praxis cycle like for a year. And so I was thinking about worship as going through this praxis cycle and making some connections and asking some more questions about like the things we sing, the languages we use, the language we use, and even just the sounds. And so found myself in a bit of a tension because we have this beautiful organ in our church building that's not from Cape Town. And we spend a lot of the money on maintaining it and making sure that it's in tune, because it's really beautiful, but it's not Cape Town. And so how do we make more sense of that? And so now continuing to journey with other worship leaders and teams, and asking different questions about sung worship and doing that through the use of the praxis cycle. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Charlie. Thami.
Thanks, Thandi. So for me, I definitely relate to what Craig shared about his background with being in a charismatic and in evangelical background and navigating what that looks like today. I guess I'm a creative, and I am navigating what that looks like within giftings and within songwriting and within worship spaces. I also teach music, which is also a really cool thing that I get to do. My current location is Cape Town, so on the land that was previously occupied by the Khoisan, or the land owned by the Khoisan. But my story is also quite unique and interesting. I'm not originally from Cape Town. I'm originally from Kimberley, which most people recognize by saying, oh, the place where there's a groot gat, the big hole. And I'm like, yes, the groot gat, which is the big hole. A small city. And I navigated that journey, arriving to Cape Town to study music, and that also affecting the way in which I've navigated my worship and worship rhythms and sung worship. So a big journey from this small little city to the big city, and I guess within that journey into being in the pursuit space, where we are also navigating what it looks like to write songs informed by our location, and then also joining the St. John's Leadership Academy, which has also led me to ask a lot of questions, which I'm informed by the praxis cycle. What does it mean for me to be immersed in my location, and how does God speak to things that are happening in my location with regards to social analysis, and how is what we are creating within the worship space, within sung worship language, speaking to these things. And very similarly to Charlie, definitely some of the the seeds where these questions arose were definitely planted at the Justice Conference. I know some of you may know, what's her name? Sandra van Opstal. I remember her growing up. We were actually leading worship, and Charlie was on the team as well as Mégan. And we're like, yeah, we're gonna lead worship and stuff. And we were there with our guitars and our pianos, and then Sandra came up and she was like, what is this? And I'm like, oh my God, what? And she's like, I'm traveling all the way from wherever I'm coming from to this beautiful land, Africa, and I'm arriving to sounds that sound very similar to what I hear where I am, and I'm a bit confused. And I was like, damn, son. And I think that's where the conversation begins, and it continues with, like, you know, conversations around, you know, who are we singing these songs for? What are they saying? And what does that mean for my location? And so my journey continues, and I'm myself just trying to navigate answering these questions and thinking more intentionally about what my story looks like, and how that brings itself or presents itself in the way in which I navigate my worship rhythms, and from that, like, flowing into sung worship, etc., etc. Yeah, hope that makes sense.
Beautiful, thank you, Thami. Over to you, Mégan.
Hey guys, yeah, I'm Mégan. Shoulder recently, found the Speck, but I'm both. Yeah, I'm really grateful to be here, and really grateful to be here with all these all these beautiful people who I learn so much from every day, all the time. I come from Mitchell's Plain, which is known as sort of the part of the Cape Flats area in Cape Town, South Africa, predominantly coloured, although it's changing with the sort of demographic is changing a little bit quite recently. And yeah, I was thinking about it, and I was like, I actually come from a space where, like, people are slain in the spirit by singing, like, koortjies, which is like what we call like choruses in, like, the sort of Cape Town, like, charismatic Pentecostal-ish space. I'm sure other people also sing, or like other spaces also sing koortjies. But yeah, it's basically like an Afrikaans word for, like, a little chorus, and we would sing these choruses over and over and over again. And I reflecting on it, that's what I come from. I come from singing these koortjies and seeing, like, the Spirit of God move on these, like, simple choruses that are sung over and over and over again. And so little chorus, thanks, Charlie. So I come from that space. That's where I was taught, I guess, to worship and to be a worshiper. I studied music with Thami, actually. I studied jazz, and yeah, that was a whole interesting journey, and I think also just a way to learn to better express kind of musically what was in my heart and what's in my mind, and that kind of thing. And so songwriting as part of that journey was a really helpful thing for me to just actually process my life, process the things that are happening around me, with no real intention to, like, use it anyway, until I got to the point of feeling, like, responsible for the songs that I felt like God had given me, or these gifts that were songs. And so I really sensed God push me into releasing them, and so started releasing music under my artist name, which is Realizing Equilibrium. So as part of that journey, both Realizing Equilibrium, so that's what I would release most of my music under. But I've also co-written for a lot of, like, artists in and around Cape Town and Africa. And yeah. Oh, also, I have the honor and joy to be part of my family Pursuit, which is super fun, and we get to work all these things out together. So yeah, really happy to be here.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mégan. So yeah, it's so wonderful to have you all being here as part of this today. And and I love hearing all of the different spaces that you have been immersed in and how those spaces have formed you. And I think we're grateful to have all of those different pieces and journeys as conversation partners in this evening. So I wanted to come to a bit of the social analysis question. And I think you've each touched on some different things that have come up for you, maybe different questions that have been raised, different realizations that you've had, or things that you've been pushing into. So you've touched a little bit on some of those things, but maybe we can dig a bit deeper into some of those questions. So as you have kind of critically engaged with those spaces, different of you have mentioned different really important points or things that happened that were key points of the journey for you. But as these things have kind of pushed you or invited you into engaging in these spaces in a different way, asking different questions of these spaces, what are some of the things that you feel like need to be addressed as we think about worship, or some of the questions that you're pressing into? What has this journey looked like for you? And I won't put anyone on the spot. Is there anyone who would like to go first, seeing as Charlie wasn't happy with me choosing him first? It was really because you're first on my screen, top left. Thami, I see you unmuting. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to go first, but you know, that this thing just came to my mind as you were speaking. I think a helpful place for me in navigating, thinking around that question is reflecting on worship nights that we started hosting maybe like two years ago, pre-COVID, so 2019, which were called First Fridays. This was like something that was started by another group of people in Joburg. We were worshiping, something we kind of caught the heart of in Cape Town, where we basically just were going around different church spaces in Cape Town, in the southern suburbs particularly, and kind of just gathering to worship. And within that, like us even just kind of trying to navigate, like, what does it mean for us to gather together? What does it mean for us to sing these songs? What do these songs mean? And I think one primary thing that we felt on our hearts was, what does it mean for us to gather as sons and daughters in community worshiping, with the intention of thinking about language and us being represented in the songs that we were singing. And I think, I remember, even outside of this example, us kind of navigating, okay, which songs do we choose? Like, okay, so how do we navigate these conversations? And there was the heart for us to, like I said, focus on choosing songs that were written by songwriters within the South African context. And it was interesting to observe like what happened in the room when we would sing those songs or when we would get there. So we'd start typically with kind of like the songs that we knew people would respond to easily, because these are the songs we've done over generations, like Hillsong, Beth, and all of those songs carrying something unique. But I noticed something change in the space when we'd sing like in Xhosa or in Afrikaans, and I was like, damn, like, what is happening? It felt like, something that we were grieved of for generations or whatever, like just doing something I mean, I can't articulate right now, but something different, almost like a gift that we weren't able to that we weren't previously able to enjoy, that we were given the invitation to kind of see and enjoy within this moment. And so I think that's where I started like kind of thinking a lot more about like, what are the things that we have in our locations and our communities that we haven't explored because we've been told that this is worship, or we've been so assimilated to an idea of like, this is what worship rhythms are, or these are the sounds that resemble worship, and primarily from this Western lens. observing a physical, like, I guess, manifestation of the beauty of the gift of the more that God has for us. And I think that's when I started asking questions about, like, what does it mean for us to think about who we are as a people in our location, and the stories that we hold, and the songs that we have, and the colors and the sounds, and how could we explore these things more within our locations. And yeah, so yeah, I guess that's I guess a story that can help navigate the more.
So beautiful. Thank you, Thami. I love what you said about, like, what happened in the room.
Yeah.
When you experimented with something different. That's really beautiful. Charlie or Mégan?
I'll go, because some of what I've been thinking kind of ties in with that. But yeah, I've just been thinking a lot of, like, as we were starting, that when we talk about worship, it's kind of like the practice or the discipline of something that we do for God, as like an act of ascribing worth to God. But like, worship is worship, individuals with stories and like flesh and bones and soul and spirit are the people who do the worship, and I think that that's really important to note, because if the worshiper worships, then what the worshiper knows, or the story of the worshiper would then, like, sort of come out through the worship. So worship is not like this, it's not this isolated thing that happens just in the air. It comes from somewhere. And I think the work of the worshiper is really faithful devotion that aren't just songs. And so, like, the faithful work of Pursuit, I mean, even We Will Worship, and some of our other, like, in Pursuit, like the greatest sort of creative community that we've, by God's grace, have been able to, like, connect with across South Africa and stuff. Sort of the same question has come up, is that in just our faithful devotion to God, in the way of trying to be faithful with what we have, and I guess to name it, like, more authentic, if I could, like, then it comes up, like, okay, but why is this idea of, like, the worship of America, or the worship of Australia, or the worship, like, these songs, like, why is that my go-to? How come that's become a crutch for us? What is the boundary or the barrier that stands in the way of me bringing my own, like, wail in my own language from my own heart before God? And so, and I think in a way that speaks to the way the worshiper understands God. And so, like, something's wrong if I don't believe that God understands the language of my heart, or how Brené August likes to say, the language of our dreams. I think there's like our theology then essentially is flawed if, as worshipers, we don't believe that God would allow us to worship in our most natural, authentic way. And so I feel like that obviously, like, leads on to many other things, but that's kind of the starting point for me, and just the thought that I had as Thami was talking. It leads to many other things and whatever, but I just thought to mention that because I feel like that's quite crucial.
So beautiful, Mégan. This embodied and authentic worship that really comes and is true to our context and where we are. I would love to just ask you to expand on one thing you said. So you talked about this idea of worship, worship as faithful devotion, but you said this is where we can wail in our own language. And I think that maybe is not something that we would often associate with worship. So for you, what does that mean, and why is that important in this conversation? If you wouldn't mind speaking to that.
Sure. And Charlie and Thami, please feel free to add any, fill in the gaps. But yeah, I think obviously first to just to note that like worship essentially is what is ascribing worth. So it's, I think even the language, like as Christians, or yeah, as people of faith, we take for granted that like worship is a normal word. It's not necessarily outside of like a very kind of spiritually informed space. And so there's a depth to that word that I think we sometimes forget when we do it so often, or when we take for granted that people understand. You know, it's this, I think, a very like deep kind of like there's something that in my makeup, in my whole value system, in my core beliefs, that I recognize is deserving of everything I am, like every breath, every praise, every idea of like glory and honor that comes from me belongs there. You know, it's like, so like I think it's important that we can break it down in that way, because essentially like that's what we're talking about. It's not just a song. And so what does that mean in all of what that is, like in the way that David would describe, like, bless the Lord, oh my soul, and all that is within me. You know, bless God's name. And so so I think it's important to like firstly just to say that. And then from there, like being a worshiper who worships, so like an actual person bringing that. I think it's important that, like, as I mentioned, like about our theology, that we are able to bring all that we are. And so like ascribing worth to God is knowing that in the hope that lives within me because of my faith, because of this core belief, because of the worthiness of who God is, I'm able to bring all that I am. I'm able to bring my joy, my pain, my anguish, my frustration, my confusion, and offer that to God as a acknowledgement. You know, like, God, I love you, and I still like acknowledge you, and I enthrone you like in my life, in my heart, like in the order of my world. Like, you're still that, and because you're that, like life sucks right now. Like, because you're that, I need to cry, and I bring my cry to you. I bring my all of that to you, and I think that that's an important part of worship, because, like you said, Thami, like Thandi, it is an embodiment of like a life of worship and like a life of devotion, not just a song that we sing this one time, you know. And because it's a life of devotion, life has seasons and cycles and ebbs and flows, and it's everything. It's not just part of it.
So beautiful. Thank you, Mégan. Yeah, so good. Charlie, what has come up? What questions have come up for you in your kind of critical analysis, social analysis within this space? Yeah, what does that journey look like for you?
Sorry, Thandi, I think Thami unmuted. She was going to maybe say something. I don't mind waiting.
Shame, man. Okay, I guess that's sweet. Thanks, Charlie. I think I was just thinking about what Mégan was saying, and like with the idea of bringing all of ourselves, and I was thinking about something that's a bit like close to home, which is like even just, you know, COVID and how we've navigated worship rhythms and sung worship, and how like asking the question, have we been able to bring our full selves, you know, in spaces of worship in this time, or have we been quickly like, or has worship been packaged in a way where like it's quickly prescriptive haste, where like God is good and we can't really bring ourselves, or we can't bring, you know, what does it mean for me to bring my full self? Can I bring anger to the space, or can I bring my stories to the space as a form of worship? And yeah, so I'm just kind of thinking around like the invitation for lament, which I guess I haven't really I guess, been grieved of seeing in spaces, particularly in the time that we've been in, I guess, with the way in which, I guess, worship has been imagined in spaces of sung worship. Perhaps we can ask the question, have worship spaces allowed ourselves to really bring our full selves and our locations and our stories?
So good. Thank you, Thami. And I guess like this idea of bringing us our full selves is so important because, I mean, within this conversation, our full selves also includes our historical context, you know, where we are in Cape Town. It includes like this reality of colonization and apartheid and the way that the city is structured and all of those different things. So I guess when spaces of worship don't invite us to bring all of ourselves, then those things get left at the door. And I think this idea that many people wrote in the chat of thinking about worship and justice, that's how these things can even be separated, these things which never should be separated, I guess. Charlie.
Thinking back on particularly with the Justice Conference, where I had like a very growing up, I would find myself in spaces that are like quite homogenous in terms of just like being like colored people together, and so that was like a norm for me, and a lot of it changed for the better with the Justice Conference, because I was then in this space with Thami, Nosi, Lusanda, Maina, these like Black women who were like I was just lucky to be there. And I just did all I could to just stay there and experience what was happening. And I think of the one night we rehearsing in, what's it, Fredo, that side in town. And we're in this room that's like not a church, it's like, it was something like a changing room in a school. So we're sitting on these benches and these women are singing, and my vernacular is very limited, and so some of the things I'm understanding, and other things I'm like, my body is saying like, this is happening, like I can feel that something is happening here, without knowing exactly what the words mean, and just found myself in awe of what God is doing. And I think that was a big moment for me. Went back to church like a few Sundays later, and extended the invitation to the congregants who don't speak English as a first language to come and share like a song, even if it's not from South Africa, and share that with us. What's the significance of that? Tell us some of your story, and your journey of worship with us, which then led to one of the ladies joining our worship team and teaching us a song in Bemba, which is from one of the many languages in Zambia. And we then learned the chorus so we could support her and sing along. And it was like amazing. And I think the significant thing in that whole story for me was just that shift in our posture, not just in relation to who God was, because this song was filled with a lot more reverence than some of the other English and Western songs that we were singing, but also helped us posture ourselves in terms of the community that we were part of, that there were people with stories that were bringing those stories, that bring those stories, and creating some kind of platform to share what worship means. And so I come and I prepare a set list of songs for a Sunday, and I almost carry some kind of power that's been for years influenced by a different power. And so all of those things coming together can become a big piece of injustice when we think about what worship is and what worship can be for us as individuals and as a community. And so definitely, like, asking simple questions and putting simple things in place has changed a lot of what I think is important when we worship. And that for me was not even a massive step, but was a small step. And I think there's more steps that we can take, but definitely bring some kind of change. And so, yeah, very grateful for that time and what's come after that time.
Thank you, Charlie. So beautiful. Sure. There's so much. I mean, I think we could unpack some of these things for hours. There's so much rich in all of your reflections. Yeah, I think that last thing you raised, Charlie, about power and thinking about who is holding power is a really important consideration in all of this, because I feel like a lot of these things can be related to power. Yes, who is choosing these songs, and like what is that doing in the space? Like, what does it do when, as in the story you shared, you are inviting people to bring songs that have not had their voice heard in that way before. Even the idea that has been mentioned a few times about language, what kind of power happens when we use particular languages, and how does bringing in different languages challenge or disrupt that and kind of shift these power dynamics? What does it do? Who has told us that we can't bring ourselves into our whole selves into these spaces? And like, where has that come from? And what kind of power is keeping it that way? What kind of power is telling us that in those spaces we can't wail? We must be a certain way. So I think, and you've all mentioned, I think, the impact of the West on the ways in which we worship, and what happens when we challenge that power, and what does it look like to shift that, both in terms of, I think you mentioned at the beginning, the things that we're singing, Charlie, the languages that we're using, the sounds you've mentioned. So yeah, I think there's so much to think about in all of this, really beautiful reflections. And I'm so grateful for this conversation with all of you, because like, for people who don't know all of these people who are speaking right now, they really authentically are walking this out, are wrestling, are journeying, and continuing to shift and change the way that they are doing things. So I think it's such a gift that we get to listen to your voices today. So the next kind of moment in our praxis cycle is this one of theological reflection or prophetic imagination. So where we are grappling with our faith, with scripture, with what God is inviting us into, what God is saying in different ways and through different people and spaces. And we are thinking about this within this conversation of worship. So as you all have engaged in these spaces, as you've wrestled, as you've sought God, and tried to live out what God is inviting us into within these spaces, what are some of the dreams that have come up for you? What are some of the things that you imagine worship could look like, both within the church and outside of the institutional church? Yeah, what are some of these dreams, these visions, these imaginings? And I think in here also, if you want to share an example of maybe where you've seen that, I think, Thami, it was beautiful to hear a little bit about what that has looked like in certain spaces for you. I think you've all shared a little bit, but I think it would be nice to hear. I think you've all mentioned the Justice Conference. It would be nice to hear like what it was about that, like what was going on there, how that was so impactful, what it did. Yeah, I would love to hear that. So stories that you have of reimagined worship, but also dreams that you have for what it could look like. Any takers? Charlie.
I'll jump in. I think the thing that was like really helpful for me was the not necessarily the actual conference, but actually the time we spent before. We spent many nights talking about things and rehearsing, but in that process, actually getting to know one another. And so for me, the thing, I think, reflecting on it theologically, was that idea that comes from Genesis 1, that we are all created in the image of God. And then in some of Lisa Sharon Harper's words, that thing of goodness that then exists between us, and almost throwing those things together in the context of a space where we're wanting to have an African identity in our worship. When some of the steps we took was to say we're only going to sing songs from our continent, then we start to see a picture unfold where we take it a little bit more seriously that we are from Africa, and within Africa there is this creation that doesn't have to look outside for what God's created, doesn't have to look outside for goodness, and almost like affirming what exists here and what exists there, because that's where God is. God's at work there, not just in one space or in one hemisphere or in one, if that makes sense. And so that on its own kind of brings a big shift and encourages me to even look a bit deeper than what I've been looking. And so, yeah, I think that's a bit very like unfolded if I'm thinking. But that's kind of one of the things about the confidence that stood out for me. The other thing would be just the encouragement to actually lament, which we spent a lot of time like learning about actually. And we continue to learn about that almost in preparation for this time of COVID in some ways, and other things that we need to really like take seriously, without that prescriptive haste that Thami is mentioning. And so to sit with those things, to realize, to reflect, and to allow it to actually inform our worship. Yeah.
So good, thank you. Sure, so much. I love Charlie. I mean, I love it all, but I think what you said about like the goodness between and the relationships and that time building up and like forming those relationships, I think that is so key, because so often it feels like worship is seen as this product that's kind of an output on a Sunday morning or whatever, and that those relationships between are kind of dismissed or missed out. And what would it mean to recognize that as an integral part of our praxis? Thank you. Thami, you unmuted.
Yeah, I was gonna definitely concur with what Charlie has mentioned. And I think what comes to me is like the idea of genuine solidarity and not tokenism, because we see a lot of that, like even in, the way in which people imagine diversity, and there's a lot of that going around in churches where we're like, yes, we're diverse if we have that one we will worship song in the song list, and then we've ticked this thing, then we've done the job. But what does it mean for us to be invested genuinely in each other's stories and where we are located outside of the byproduct of it, which is, I guess, whatever we create together, which can be a song or whatever. What does it mean for us to genuinely care about each other? What does it mean for us to genuinely have a revelation that we are all image bearers and that we all have stories and that we all have sounds that we have as gifts that we can bring to a space? I'm reminded of, the scripture that I thought about a lot, even within the First Friday happenings, which is Revelation 7, where it speaks about every tribe and nation. That image of every tribe and this tribe, every tribe has come together to bring praises to God, like to declare that you are holy, God. And there's this image of reverence, and I was thinking about that there was an intentionality for there being a specification of every tribe and tongue, and what does that mean for us within our imagination of a worship that is that can be as much as it can be a representation of the gift of diversity. And I think a story that I can tell is one that is quite funny, and it's one of the stories that we had got a testimony from one of the First Friday sessions, one of the early ones. I think it was the second one where we were kind of like navigating what kinds of songs to sing. And I remember I think we were at Mobile Baptist and we sang an Afrikaans song, which is spicy if you think about like the context and like our history and apartheid and all of that kind of stuff. So and it's cool. It's kind of like, we are invested in doing this together without being afraid of tension. Like, can we do that as communities of faith where we are not faking diversity, but we're invested in each other? So this story is funny because we did an Afrikaans song and it was great for some, and for others it was interesting, and of course, like, we do different kinds of languages, etc. And in this testimony, this girl was saying, yo man, like, First Friday was great, like, and it was really wonderful. And then she was like, but there was this moment, she was like, when you guys did that Afrikaans song, something in me was just like, hey, this is awkward. and then she was like, she was, I think she was plus or whatever. And of course, like, that triggered something in terms of like her history with what does Afrikaans, what does this mean for me, etc. And she was like, for a moment, I was just like, what is this? And then she was like, but then after that, I looked around and I saw like these two Afrikaner guys standing there, like going, like singing along to the song. And for a moment, I just kind of paused and like kind of looked around in the room, and I felt something. I felt the Holy Spirit doing something that I wasn't able to understand. And all of a sudden I started to connect to the song that, at first was a bit weird and like, questions, I'm disconnecting. But then in a moment, like all of these things kind of like are meaningless because the Spirit is doing something I'm not able to comprehend. And all of a sudden, like, I'm able to participate in this kind of thing that's happening. And I think I'm mentioning that story because it's nuanced, right? Like, I mean, one could explore, that depth and what does that mean, and that person's story, and one could pause and sit in the trauma and whatever. But I think for me, it was significant because it meant that people could it was almost like a token of hope that we can't do this diversity thing without being ignorant of each other's stories and without trying to just put a band-aid on our history or whatever. And we can trust the Holy Spirit to do these things through us, even as we navigate, our awareness of our social locations and our stories and our history. And we can trust the Holy Spirit to do these things. And what a beautiful testament. And that was genuine. It was not like us just trying to fake it. And maybe that was a small kind of gift of this thing of like, what does it mean for us to be united in our diversity, as we see in that scripture, Revelation 7, that invites us. And for me, like, that's, I guess, like, that's what I hope we can allow ourselves as faith communities to explore. What does it look like for us to really see each other as image bearers without there being tokenism, without it being a surface level work, what does it mean, like Charlie's saying, to be invested in each other, in our stories? And then we see what happens thereafter. Then we're able to sing the songs together or whatever, and then we're able to genuinely lament together, and what does it look like for us? Does it have to be a song? Could it be a conversation? Could it be, yeah, so I think I'm just kind of throwing out those reflections in thinking around, what is this gift that God has given us, through, the intentionality of us being diverse and of every tribe and tongue, and have we explored enough of this gift of us being from these different tribes? And yeah.
Sure. So powerful, Thami. Thank you. So good. I mean, I think that, yeah, that story is so powerful. And I think I love that you said, this thing is nuanced, but when we allow ourselves to bring our full selves into that space, there's actually potential for, I think Cecilia said in the chat, there's space for healing to take place, not to to recognize these triggers and our history and our context and all that does. But if there's space to actually be authentic in that, like what is the possibility? We're not just pushing that to the side or pretending it doesn't exist in the name of unity, but actually the struggle, entering into the struggle, entering into the wrestle. Mégan.
I must admit, I forgot that I was part of the panel for a second. I was just enjoying listening to Charlie and Thami. But
a good sign.
Yeah, I think I've always imagined, just quickly mention the whole idea of a worship leader facilitating the time, and the kind of the responsibility only being on the one or two people in a room full of hundreds of people. I often think about that and bring that before the Lord, especially with scriptures one comes with a song, the other one comes with a testimony, the other one comes, the idea of we all bring and then we all share what we bring. And so I often imagine what that could look like in the way that we understand praise and worship times. And at the same time, I completely appreciate a lot of individuals that I've seen their commitment to just being faithful with this responsibility. So at the same time, I see the beauty on both sides, but it's just something that I just always wonder about. So I just offer that very simply as a wondering. And then yeah, I mean, the language thing is such a beautiful thing, understanding the power dynamics that exist within that, especially in a context like South Africa. I think it's important that we can think deeply about that and not take for granted just that we do what we do because that's just what it is, But yeah, I think ultimately, as I was listening to everyone, just realizing that our sung time of worship, our communal moments, is just an outworking of what happens together on every other day or outside of that time, and that also has to be worshipped. I think of the commandments of God and even just what we understand to be the 10 commandments, and the idea of so much of that being a reflection of of the worth we ascribe to God, like God's self, like who we understand God to be, and then who we understand one another to be, and then our commitment to each other, and to God at the same time, and how that was God's command for worship, not necessarily like gather together in hundreds and sing, but that is a beautiful gift that I feel like works itself out from following the ways of God every other time. And so I think in my imagining, it really comes back to, for me, like the idea of like worship is worship. And so what is the worship I understand? Who does the worship I understand God to be? Who does the worship I understand the neighbor to be? And then obviously like the value of our worship would be informed, or the expression of our worship would be then be informed from there. But yeah, those are just some reflections that I've had, and not necessarily like, yeah, like on top of what someone else has said. It's just like random thoughts.
So good. So good. Thank you. Thami, did you want to jump in? I see you unmuting.
Yeah, Shem, I just saw Rashid commenting here saying, besides our tongues, there's also no space for indigenous instruments, sounds, ways of seeing with the colonial imagination. And I'm just like, yeah, man, like indigenous sounds. And I think one we haven't touched on is like instruments. And I think a word that I'm using, or I'm thinking about, is exploration, which, here, like, instruments. Back to that story of like what Sandra van Opstal was saying, with like her arriving here, and she's like, damn, like we have a piano, whatever. Not to say it like we're not bashing, those are amazing instruments, but like imagine the more that is available for us to enjoy from even maybe songs that don't have words, where we're just listening to somebody play the uhadi. I don't know if you guys know Amanda's son who plays that, and I don't know, I think there's just so much that we can enjoy from I'm sure Rashid could speak into this even more, but like different kinds of instruments that we have even on this land that we haven't quite explored or given ourselves permission to, that can bring a greater, more, it's just like there's just so many gifts more for us to enjoy. I think of, like, for example, like listening just to the uhadi and like being Xhosa myself, like, I mean, I'm deeply assimilated into Western vibes and all of that, but like recently, like Rash and I would have conversations where I'm like, man, I'm struggling to listen to worship music, and I'm just listening to African music. So I'm like, there's just something I can't describe about this music that's just speaking. It's like worship. I can't describe it. It's just, and I wonder what that means. And yeah, I guess just speaking into that invitation for us to explore the many gifts that lie in things that maybe have also been demonized because of our Western assimilation that have stopped us from exploring, so yeah.
So good, thank you.
I just wanted to add, like, onto what Thami's saying, like, I think like the catch is often for me being like, I really have to allow myself to be African, like on all the days, because then it won't be so much work to think of what authentic worship looks like. To just be, to just be what flows from who I know I am, or what I know I am and stuff. And I think I have to always check myself that it's not like the West is not a people. Like, the West is a people, and the expression of their peopleness is what it is, and it's beautiful for them, and they will spend time working it out. And so I like have to always remind myself to honor that, and then at the same time, because I honor that, I can also honor that we are people of God, and like Thami said, like where we are, we honor who we are and what has come from the land that God has given us. Like these are not we easily demonize certain things because of what we've inherited, like certain theologies that we've inherited, but but like all the God-given like things and like tangible things and the color of our skin and like all, you know, all the layers to it. Like I think in our embracing that every day, it will make it easier for us to then authentically express worship with that and in that, like in some of these settings.
So good. Thank you, Megan. And I think, I mean, hearing you speak about that, and Carol also mentioned something in the comments about an inferiority complex around expressing like authentically who we are as Africans within our worship. And yeah, just thinking, I'm reminded of something that Paulo Freire talks about. I mean, he's talking in the context of like oppressors and oppressed. And I mean, I think we can think about that like within our history and colonization. Many people have mentioned we've been so conformed and assimilated into Western ways of doing things, ways of being, ways of worshiping. And he talks about that the people who have been oppressed, marginalized, actually have the power to liberate all of us. And I think there's something incredibly liberating and such a gift when we can step into that, not only for ourselves as Africans, but I think that liberation stretches far beyond us and invites others into liberation as well. So it feels really like really important work that we do that. And I love that you are all doing that. So we, the last point in the praxis cycle is action. And I don't want us to talk for too much longer because we do want to make some space for some reflections and comments, questions from people who are here. And we also have a special song that we're going to play. But I do want to hear from people. One practical thing that either you have been doing or are wanting to do or would want to invite people into coming out of this conversation and these reflections. Let me start with Thami.
Lol. That's a difficult question. I think back to what Megan was mentioning about being, I think for me as an individual, I'm just doing that, like, who am I? And what is my location? What does that mean? What story do I hold? And how do I, how can I tell it? And what story is my community telling, and how do I listen and enjoy, and then if we let there, like, invite others into that kind of conversation or whatever. That's quite airy-fairy, but yeah.
No, that's so good. I think it's great to hear from you guys about this, because I think sometimes we think of action needs to be something that's going to change the entire world, and I think that can often stop us from doing anything. So I think it's really important, these examples, and I think what you said, who are we listening to? I am going to intentionally listen to people and spaces that I have not listened to before. So good. Charlie?
Yeah, I'm a bit like thinking about a few things. One in particular is to not try and do this perfect sounding band that's put together. I have a nephew who's 9 years old that plays the drums, and he plays a bit of guitar. So I got the invitation to a church like last week or the week before, and so I was like, "Do you want to go with us and play drums?" like the people were so fascinated with this 9-year-old that's playing. But like there was something about that story in the beginning about that I shared about that goodness that exists between people, that then gives some kind of flavor and fragrance and sound to our worship. That's not necessarily something that you can rehearse for a certain amount of hours and that be the product of it. And then I think the other thing is with that is to be intentional about who we take with us on a journey and who we invite along for the journey. Because some people might take a bit longer to think about this idea of us being African. What does that sound like, and what is the language that comes with that? But then to jump kind of in and out of the worship space, to be able to read a book like The Sacrifice for Africa, or that has a particular kind of theology that's not coming through the Western songs that we've been familiar with. And so like doing that sometimes with other worship leaders to help change this picture of like the inferiority that we think of, or Minor says that it's the demonizing of African music and African language, to kind of break those things in a real tangible way where we can experience God through an African lens, through African sound, through African feeling of things. And then maybe this is my last comment, is around music being something that's moved Africans for like centuries. And we don't have to think even too far back or ask ourselves, what is the sound we hear when people go and march against something? We hear singing and we hear music that happens. And we sometimes say that can't necessarily be worship, or it can't be helpful. But I want to suggest that is helpful. I don't know if it's a worship, but it's something that does something for us as Africans. Whether we end up in a toy, or whether we just end up on the ground. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Charlie. So important. Mégan. In action
sure.
from you.
I love the idea of just music kind of being something that Africans very naturally respond to. I don't just think Africans, I think people all around the world have seen it, just something you can't really explain. And so I do believe that we have to think of music as a gift. I don't think we can just throw it out, you know, especially considering that like so much harm has been and is done through it. I think it's worth like fighting for in a way, and believing can be redeemed, and we are part of the picture of the redemption of it. Yeah, but sure, I think everything that Thami and Charlie have said, I think is really beautiful. Just being, yeah, and not doing it alone, inviting others to do it with. And I think I've often seen like when people would have a revelation or something, they'd run with it so strong that it almost becomes like unhelpful because no one else understands it, and then it almost like sort of enforcing this like elitist or this like superiority, that even like the thing that you've come for, like you say the revelation is against like superiority or whatever. I sometimes see like that if you have a revelation of something that can that often be used to like further oppress other people because maybe they don't understand. And so I think like what Charlie's mentioned, like people are on their own journeys, like we're all on our own journeys, and some people take longer to kind of come to terms with certain things because of their unique stories. And so I think if anything, to action like patience in the journey, and to constantly allow God's grace to invite us to say, like, God, search me, search my heart, like point out anything in me that offends you, and then lead me along the path of everlasting life. You know, Psalm 139. Like that we're able to constantly come back to that. I think is part of the faithful action. Yeah.
Sure, so powerful. So we have 10 minutes until 9. So one thing we want to do is to play a song from Pursuit's upcoming album. Very briefly, if you can, just say what Pursuit is, what you guys are trying to do, and maybe tell us a little bit about the album and kind of what you are trying to do with it. And then we're going to get to listen to that, which is an incredible privilege because it's not out yet. So that's super exciting. And I am going to put their Patreon, they have a Patreon page. And so if you would like to see more of what they're doing and follow them and support them because they need money to produce their album, they're doing really important work. So please do that. Yeah, so Thami or Mégan, would you like to share very briefly, because we don't have too much time? And then
I guess, yeah, it's been a journey for us, also just navigating, answering these questions, or trying to navigate who are we in our location and what are the stories we carry as individuals and within the space. And it's been exciting to explore and experiment with sound as well outside of language. We're also thinking about language in a sense of, like, you know, different languages, like we explore Afrikaans, Xhosa, etc., but also what we are saying in what we are singing. So this song that I will play is a really nice example of an experimentation with, like, trying to think about our context and how sound has, I guess, like how as Africans we gather and worship together, and what those sounds can feel like and look like in ways that maybe we haven't explored before. So yeah, okay, I'm gonna play a little clip. Okay. So this song is called Ikaya Letu, which just means our home. And we start off singing in a cappella, which is intentional, with no instruments, because part of what we know, like, in our communities is this beauty of us naturally, like, loving with, I guess, singing together without instruments. There's something about that, and harmonizing is a very African thing. And then we experiment with some instruments, and so we start singing in isiXhosa, and then we go into Afrikaans, and then isiTswana, which is cool. So, let's see if
amazing. Thank you so much. I got kicked out, so I actually missed the last part, but beautiful. And I know how much work has gone into that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us as part of this conversation. That's really special that we get to experience that together. Amazing. We're super excited to hear more and grateful for the work that you're doing in this space. before we end, I just briefly want to tell you a bit about the warehouse. So we are obviously the warehouse. Different of you may have come into contact with us in different ways, but basically our vision is to see churches living out the peace and justice of God for the world. We believe that communities of Jesus followers are the hands and feet, the people who embody this praxis of really living into what God's dream for the world should look like. And so we try and position ourselves in whatever way we can to serve that, whether that's hosting conversations like this, or events, or journeying with church leaders and leaders in churches, facilitating processes, various different things. So please follow us. Please get into contact with us if you want to know more. We would love to serve you in the different journeys that you're on, and think of ways that we can do this. And also, I think many NGOs and many such organizations are struggling at the moment with funding, and we depend a lot on donations and grants. So if you would like to partner with us in that way, the link has been put in the chat. That would be amazing to support this work that we do. But thank you so much for being with us this evening. It's been really wonderful. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have.